Greetings and salutations everyone, my name is Kirk and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we're talking about my Week 9 waiver wire targets for the 2020 fantasy football season. On today's episode, of course, we're going to be talking about waiver wire targets at the running back, wide receiver, tight end, quarterback, and defensive positions going into Week 9. Of course, we'll talk about some guys you could pick up and stream at the positions, but we're also looking for players that can help us for the rest of the season. Again, we're only halfway through the 2020 season. We've got another 8 weeks to the fantasy football championships, so we're still trying to build our rosters, gain talent that not only going to help us in the coming weeks with the bye weeks on hand, the injuries that are taking place, but guys that can help us in the long run and carry our teams to the finish line. Now, before we start today's video, I want to thank you guys for the incredible support. We're almost at 33,000 subscribers. So if you have not yet already, click that subscribe button. Again, we're making fantasy football content here on the daily for the entirety of the 2020 season. Tomorrow, we'll talk about my top 36 running back rankings as we usually do later in the week. Because we've gotten to week 8, I wanted to go ahead and do a rest of season strength of schedule. So if you guys are interested in that, make sure you click the like button down below. Let me know in the comment section that that's something that you guys want to see, and I'll be sure to make that video. Outside of that, again, while you're in the description of the video, you can find timestamps there on the respective players that we talk about today, and the Discord link. Again, we launched our Discord last week, publicly. So if you'd like to join, ask questions, join the community there, the link is down in the description. Click that, and you can either sign up or just connect your account and join our community server. All right, outside of that, thank you everybody, and let's get into this, shall we? All right, so we're talking about my Week 9 running back waiver wire targets to start off today's episode. Don't forget the Rams, the Cincinnati Bengals, the Philadelphia Eagles, and the Cleveland Browns. They are all on bye week this week. I will mention a couple of those players, but in passing rather than specifically focusing on them heavily. So starting off with the running back position, my number one waiver wire running back pickup of the week is Zach Moss. Now, it's not by accident. We knew that Zach Moss was going to be an imposing threat in this backfield. Even in the preseason, we knew that Devin Singletary, with all the situations that were going on during camp, everything was leaning in the direction of Zach Moss. Now that he's been fully healthy in the last 2 weeks, we've seen him progressively gotten more and more touches. Just this past week, had himself 14 rushing attempts for 81 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns. He played 53% of the snaps. That's 2 weeks in a row in which he's outsnapped Devin Singletary. They pretty much split the touches 50-50 in this backfield. But that being said, I think more and more, as long as Zach Moss is getting opportunities, he's going to deliver on them. The fact that he is scoring down in the red zone, that's not something that we see often from running backs in the Buffalo Bills offense, considering Josh Allen's the guy that typically run it in, and he even had a rushing touchdown yesterday. But either way, Zach Moss had a 20-point game and a half PPR yesterday against the New England Patriots. This upcoming week, they take on the Seattle Seahawks. I know they have a bye week coming up soon, but if in fact Zach Moss continues to prove himself, he will establish this as himself as the starting running back of the Buffalo Bills, which will have value down the line. Okay, we move on to my number 2 option. I think this guy's probably already owned. I'm assuming J.K. Dobbins should not be mentioned. That's why I didn't talk about him last week. When we were going into Week 8, I talked more about Gus Edwards, but hopefully, I even looked at the ownership. He's not even owned in more than 70% of leagues. So guys, again, please make sure you go pick up J.K. Dobbins. He had himself a fantastic game. The Baltimore Ravens rushing attack seems like they're the only offense that can consistently run on the Pittsburgh Steelers. Of course, they play each other twice a year. They know each other very well. But my goodness, I did not expect J.K. Dobbins to perform as well as he did. 15 rushing attempts, 113 rushing yards against that Pittsburgh Steelers defensive line. Had himself 2 targets, 1 catch for 8 yards, 12.6 fantasy points, and played 66% of the snap in comparison to Gus Edwards, who only played 32% of the offensive snaps at the running back position. So again, he pretty much out-snapped him, didn't have as many touches, but eventually, as long as he's getting more and more opportunities and delivering on it at this kind of a rate, it just seems to me that J.K. Dobbins is in line to get more and more work as the season progresses in this offense. Should be a great pickup. Jordan Wilkins. So yesterday, we had a little bit of an issue. The Indianapolis Colts game starts. And right off the rip, yes, we see Jonathan Taylor in the backfield. We see Nyheim Hines. But also we see a little bit of a sprinkle of Jordan Wilkins. Now, Jordan Wilkins has been in the league for, his 3rd upcoming season. He's been in the league for a couple years now. He came in with Nyheim Hines. They were both drafted in the same draft class, but he wasn't utilized as much because of the presence of a Marlon Mack in this offense. But now, for some reason, just this past Sunday against the Detroit Lions, a defense that was giving up the 5th most points to opposing running backs and stayed true to their name there, gave up a lot of points to Jordan Wilkins. Now, he had 20 rushing attempts, 89 rushing yards, had a rushing touchdown, caught a pass on 1 target for 24 receiving yards, 19.8 half PPR points. Played 51% of the snaps and absolutely dominated in this game. As of right now, I went and I looked at it. I was like, why was it that Jonathan Taylor only had 11 rushing attempts, mustered up, 20 some odd yards? According to what I found, Frank Reich said that Jonathan Taylor is currently dealing with an ankle injury. Well, that is something to definitely keep an eye on, especially considering the fact that this team wants to run this ball as much as they do. It seems like Jordan Wilkins is the guy to pick up, handcuff him in relation to Jonathan Taylor. Of course, Nyheim Hines is going to get his work, respectively. We want to see more usage instead of the touchdown upside because, again, that's so volatile. But, again, with Jordan Wilkins, I feel like if Jonathan Taylor is going to be limited in any capacity and or going to miss some time, he could be of value. I know they play against Baltimore this week, but I don't think Baltimore's defense is a team that, it's impossible to run the ball against. I think you could definitely get it done. And Jordan Wilkins, not a bad option here. Gus Edwards, we bring up his name because, again, even with Dobbins producing well, now that I've seen this offense kind of produce without marking him in the backfield, I'm thinking they've got to move on from marking him. I mean, just let bygones be bygones, cut him off. Let these two young running backs carry the backfield. Gus Edwards, again, I only mentioned his snap counts in relation to J.K. Dobbins, not to show you that he was getting outsnapped by more than 50% of the total game, but because in 32% of the snaps, he was still able to get 16 rushing attempts and out-touch a guy like Dobbins and even produce pretty good numbers. 87 rushing yards, had himself a rushing touchdown. We knew he'd be the goal line back because, again, he is the bigger guy and just runs people over like a bowling ball. Gus the Bus Edwards, not a bad option. Again, if this offense is going to continue to run the ball, which they seem to be, the rest of the season schedule in terms of the fantasy playoffs, they've got some really easy games coming down the line. If these two guys are the 1-2 combo, could be a pretty good sight to see. We move on to Damien Harris, another running back that I anticipated was going to have a good week because, again, the Buffalo Bills cannot stop the run. It is just a fact of the matter. And as soon as Damien Harris came in and was running the ball as well as he was, I knew, all right, this game's over. And honestly, the Patriots probably should have won that game if it was not for that fumble late in the game. It was trending in the direction where the Patriots was just dominating on the ground. Damien Harris had himself 16 rushing attempts for 102 rushing yards. That's the second time already this season since coming back from the IR that he has rushed for over 100 yards. Had himself a rushing touchdown. Sure, he doesn't get as much utilization in the passing game, but to be honest, in terms of total snap counts, he doesn't even get that much usage overall. He only played 20 snaps, and in those 20 snaps, had 16 carries. So when he's on the field, they want to utilize him for sure. The rest of the time, we see Rex Burkhead, James White running around, but those guys don't really get many touches either. We have to continue to rely upon Damien Harris because I still think he has got a lot of value. They play against the Jets this week. Could be something of a pretty good game coming down the line here of Damien Harris. JaMycal Hasty. So we mentioned JaMycal Hasty because, again, he was the starting running back last night, even though he didn't score the most points amongst all the running backs in that backfield because Jerick McKinnon, for some reason, had 3 rushing attempts for -1 yards, but still had himself a rushing touchdown, stole it on the goal line, so be it. I still think that JaMycal Hasty, as we continue, is probably going to be the guy because Tevin Coleman popped on the questionable list yesterday. As soon as he came back from the IR, got hurt again. Not a surprise. They play against the Green Bay Packers. And for many of you, you know what exactly Dalvin Cook did to that team yesterday. I mean, by himself, literally by himself, carried the Minnesota Vikings to 4 touchdowns and 31 carries? I mean, my goodness, Dalvin Cook was unstoppable. And it's not just because Dalvin Cook's a monster and his offensive line and this scheme is so effective at running the ball, but it's also because of the fact that the Green Bay Packers can't stop the run. The last time the Green Bay Packers faced against the San Francisco 49ers, NFC Championship game, we all remember what happened. Raheem Mostert going for over 200 yards, had over 157 yards after contact. We know what, is capable of this. Now, the question remains, with George Kittle out, with Jimmy Garoppolo potentially out for the next coming week, and the game happening on Thursday night, what are we to see? Nick Mullins, Ross Dwelley, they're going to be undermanned. They're going to be a backup offense. But if they can consistently run the ball and impose their will, I think they can find value there with JaMycal Hasty for sure this upcoming week. Phillip Lindsay is my number 7. Again, I was surprised also to see this. Phillip Lindsay's not really owned in many leagues. Another thing that I'm surprised to see is the lack of usage for Phillip Lindsay. The fact that he only had 7 touches yesterday, but those 7 touches basically came out to be 86 total yards and a rushing touchdown. He needs more touches out of this backfield. I think they need to go ahead and respect him and get him at least 12 touches a game. his ability to break out on some of these runs is unbelievable. And in comparison to Melvin Gordon, I know they wanted Gordon to play well against his former team. We've got to see Phillip Lindsay get more utilization, especially when you're coming back in a game. A guy that is as capable as Lindsay in the passing game, I just feel like he needs to be used more. Regardless, I think he's a fantastic pickup going forward. This offense looked a lot better yesterday. Hopefully, against Atlanta this upcoming week, can continue that streak. We have, of course, Troymaine Pope as my number 8. Now, you may be wondering, who the heck is Troymaine Pope? I mean, it's another running back in this Chargers backfield that a lot of you may not be aware of, but here's the entire situation. Justin Jackson played well yesterday, but Joshua Kelly's practically lost his own job. Troymaine Pope came in yesterday and was a burst of energy for this offense. I mean, there was a reason why yesterday the Los Angeles Chargers offense ran for over 200 all-purpose yards on the ground against the Denver Broncos team, which was giving up the least amount of points to opposing running backs this season, or in that range. Troymaine Pope came in, had himself 10 rushes for 67 yards, 7 targets, 5 catches for 28 receiving yards, 12 fantasy points on only 29% of the snaps. They play against the Las Vegas Raiders. Again, another one of these teams that give up a lot of points on the ground. If, in fact, Pope isn't dealing with that concussion because he got bopped pretty hard by, goodness, I forget the safety's name for the Denver Broncos. He got hit pretty hard there, a little bit of whiplash. If he's ready to go, not a bad option. The last option I wanted to mention is DeeJay Dallas. Again, I'm not 100% certain if Chris Carson, Carlos Hyde are going to be ready for this upcoming week. If they give them the week off, again, there is a very good possibility that they don't need those 2 starting running backs to come in. They could just continue to utilize DeeJay Dallas like they did yesterday against San Francisco. Against Buffalo, shouldn't be a big deal. Again, Dallas played 79% of the offensive snaps, 18 total carries on the ground for 41 yards, had himself a rushing touchdown, then got his utilization in the passing game, 5 targets, 5 receptions, 17 receiving yards, and a touchdown. 20.3 points. He was a huge play for the hidden gems. Absolutely came in and delivered for many of you. And I'm glad to have rostered him and played him this past week. If again, he's going to be given the opportunity, I'd like to run him again this week. But again, it's all contingent on the fact that who's healthy in the backfield and who's ready to go. Okay, those are our top 9 running back targets. Again, there are a lot of other guys that could be mentioned, but we only have so much time, and I think these are guys that, again, aren't owned in majority of leagues, and you can definitely pick up a couple of them here and there and improve your lineups as of right now. Okay, we move on to the wide receiver position, and we start off with Corey Davis, who had an incredible week. Of course, we talked about picking up Corey Davis last week, but my goodness, we did not anticipate the kind of performance he had. Of course, he came back out within a second consecutive game of 10-plus targets. Fantastic. Love to see it. Had himself 8 catches for 128 yards and a receiving touchdown against Cincinnati's secondary. Cincinnati, again, had been dealing with injuries in the secondary, and obviously we anticipated either A.J. Brown to take advantage of it and or Corey Davis. A.J. Brown got his 10 points, then was quiet for the rest of the game, and Corey Davis absolutely took over with 22.8 fantasy points. This upcoming week, they play against Chicago. It is a tougher matchup, but again, A.J. Brown is going to continue to pull number 1 coverage from probably Fuller this week, and then you'll have Corey Davis on the backside being able to do what he does best and take advantage of the amount of opportunity he's been given from a guy like Ryan Tannehill. I think he's going to continue to improve. Prior to this game, was averaging already about 10 points per game. His stats are continuing to build, and I think Corey Davis is really making an argument in his final year of his rookie contract to really get himself established and brought back to the Tennessee Titans next year. Again, he's a great fantasy football pickup for the rest of the season. Mike Williams, another one of these players that, again, from the same draft class as Corey Davis. These are 2 guys that over the years have struggled here and there, but the inconsistencies of Mike Williams this season has kind of turned me off to the potential. Is he ready to actually come in and get it done? That's the question. Last week, had 4 targets, 1 catch, was nothing for the team. In a game in which they blew out the other team by a pretty good amount and put up 35 plus points. Now, this upcoming week, they ended up putting up 30 points, but it was with the utilization of Mike Williams. The ability to use him in the deep ball as a deep ball threat. The fact that Mike Williams almost had 2 receiving touchdowns if it wasn't for the fact that he was out of bounds. He tried to reach the ball over to the pylon, wasn't able to get there. They marked him down at the 1. Either way, I think Mike Williams had himself a fantastic game. I think his 1 touchdown catch was a one-handed catch in the back of the end zone. Again, the fact that he's getting as much utilization, 8 targets, 5 receptions, 99 yards, and a touchdown, could have been another extra touchdown here or there. looks fantastic to me. Plays against the Las Vegas Raiders. As long as Justin Herbert's going to continue to send the ball in his direction, of course we know Keenan Allen's going to get the ball, but as long as Mike Williams continues to get consistent targets, I'm not complaining. I'm throwing him out there, and he's a great pickup. Christian Kirk is a player that is coming off of the bye week again, along with the Houston Texans, Jacksonville Jaguars, and Washington football team. The Arizona Cardinals are other players that may be, potentially ignored this week. Of course, many of you went ahead and picked him up last week, which you should have, because again, in the last 2 games that he has played, he's had 11 targets, 7 catches, 123 receiving yards, and 4 receiving touchdowns. This upcoming week, they take on the Miami Dolphins, and from what we saw Jared Goff do to the Miami Dolphins, first half, Jared Goff is a different animal. Second half, Jared Goff actually was able to produce, got Robert Woods 2 touchdowns. Cooper Kupp had 21 targets, over 100 receiving yards in a great game. I think Kyler Murray and this offense is far more capable and will be able to deliver and put up some points. Again, Christian Kirk, another one of these consistent plays. If in fact he's scoring touchdowns and getting the ample opportunity, I think he'll continue to see targets and continue to make plays. He is the number 3 option. Number 4 is Marvin Jones Jr., and mainly because of the injury that took place to Kenny Golladay this weekend. Unfortunately, Kenny Golladay, 4 targets, 0 receptions, left everyone with a goose egg in their lineup this week because of the injury that was sustained. Now, from what I've heard, he is going to be missing a pretty good amount of time. It'll probably be a couple weeks. This isn't something that we haven't seen before. Of course, Kenny Golladay already missed a couple games this season. In his absence, we were definitely trying to rely upon Marvin Jones. We didn't see that early in the season, but I want to hope that Marvin Jones can once again have himself some breakout games. Just this past week, caught 3 passes, 39 yards, 2 receiving touchdowns, 7 targets. But again, that kind of volatility scares me to an extent. But the thing that kind of gives me a little bit of hope is the fact that they play against the Minnesota Vikings this week. The last time I saw Marvin Jones and Matthew Stafford play against the Minnesota Vikings, the combination turned into 4 receiving touchdowns for a guy like Marvin Jones. And also, funny thing was, he played against the Indianapolis Colts yesterday, and the starting cornerback was Xavier Rhodes, who was the starting quarterback of the Minnesota Vikings last year when he did catch that 4 touchdown game. So it wasn't really a surprise that he dominated against Indianapolis yesterday, and could potentially do that this upcoming week against Minnesota, because Minnesota's secondary, absolutely a wasteland. Injuries and a bunch of guys that are just really inexperienced right now. Either way, I think Marvin Jones, in the absence of Kenny Golladay, is going to have to step up, and he'll be able to do so as a viable fantasy wide receiver. Jerry Jeudy's my number 5. Again, Jerry Jeudy has been very inconsistent this year. In fact, this past weekend's game was probably the best game of his entire year. The fact that he only caught 4 out of his 10 receptions is a little bit concerning, but I think as the weeks progress, they will have better and better matchups. They don't have a bye week anytime soon because they've already passed that. I think playing against Atlanta this week is the true test. Sure, Deshaun Hamilton ended up scoring a touchdown. It would have been Tim Patrick if Tim Patrick was active. I know KJ Hamler, caught the game winner, but it doesn't really matter. I think as long as Jerry Jeudy's getting targets, he will eventually get put in the right position to make a play and eventually score big points. He's a guy that I think is only owned in 60% of leagues, and someone that I'm interested in picking up and playing for the rest of the year, potentially as being my number 5 wide receiver option that'll be on my bench. I think he has a lot of upside and potential. As a lot of these rookie wide receivers are stepping up. I think it's only a matter of time until Jeudy ends up stepping up himself. We move on to Mecole Hardman. So again, Hardman had himself one of the weirdest weeks I've ever seen. He started off early with a pretty easy touchdown, and then proceeded to get an incredible amount of targets. 9 total targets, 7 receptions for 96 receiving yards, 1 receiving touchdown, of course, early in the game on that little bit of a push pass forward. 19.1 fantasy points. Plays against the Carolina Panthers this upcoming week. Again, the way that Patrick Mahomes played, the fact that they didn't have to run the ball against the Jets, they could easily do that against Carolina. I know Carolina gives up a lot of points on the ground, but if they're not going to take advantage of it, they're not going to run the ball as much, then Mecole Hardman is going to be a guy that is going to continue to see targets if, in fact, Sammy Watkins is going to continue to miss time. We've seen Hardman have these blowout performances then disappear. I'm just hoping that he's here to stay and be a consistent play for us. The volatility is definitely something that we worry about. Hopefully, he gets more and more utilization and targets and opportunity like a Tyreek Hill, because Tyreek, he has his touchdown upside. I mean, the fact is, Tyreek Hill has been consistent this year because he scored a touchdown in every single game, almost, I think, except for 1, and that was his worst week. So otherwise, he scored a touchdown every single game. If Hardman can get to that point of scoring a touchdown every single game, then we have a different animal on our hands here. Moving on, Curtis Samuel. Speaking of scoring touchdowns, he scored 2 this past week on Thursday Night Football against the Atlanta Falcons. 1 on the ground. He had 3 carries, 23 yards, and a rushing touchdown. Really killed Mike Davis owners this past week, and Mike Davis is probably going to be gone going forward. With Christian McCaffrey coming back, I don't know if Curtis Samuel is going to get as many carries out of the backfield, maybe on some jet sweeps here and there. But the fact that Curtis Samuel was the only relevant wide receiver in terms of fantasy this past week against the Atlanta Falcons makes me think that maybe they want to utilize him more and more, get him more involved. DJ Moore didn't see a target or a reception until the fourth quarter. Robbie Anderson was pretty much a dud. Maybe Curtis Samuel is another one of these players that could help unlock this offense. With Christian McCaffrey coming back, there's always a potential that, they're going to have 4 mouths to feed in this offense in terms of the receiving game. Curtis Samuel ends up stepping up, could be a potential option going forward. We have Jakobi Meyers. Now, we talked about Damiere Byrd as our hidden gem, and I thought Damiere Byrd would be a great option, but instead all of the targets went to Jakobi Meyers, the other wide receiver on the other side of the field. Maybe I should have gone ahead and correlated the fact that there's a potential that Jakobi or Damiere Byrd might not see the targets and just, maybe not go for that. Unfortunately, I got burnt off of it. Many of you may have gotten burnt, but Jakobi Meyers had all the targets. 10 targets, 6 receptions, 58 receiving yards. This upcoming week, they take on the New York Jets. Should be an easy matchup. Of course, Edelman will be out. I think N'Keal Harry might come back, but even then, N'Keal Harry can go to the number 1 wide receiver spot, and Jakobi Meyers can continue to feast as a number 2 on this team. There's always a potential of that, so we throw out his name. The last option I wanted to mention, I know there's a lot of receiving options like Jalen Reagor. I know there's guys like Darnell Mooney, who we talked about. Even Anthony Miller stepped up this past week. Demarcus Robinson stepped up. There's a lot of receiving options, but I wanted to mention Russell Gage because, again, if Calvin Ridley is going to miss time with that midfoot sprain, then he'd be the automatic number 2 wide receiver of this team. If, in fact, they trade Julio Jones in the coming days, of course, prior to the trade deadline, then Russell Gage would automatically be the number 1 receiving target on that team. So we're keeping an eye on it. Russell Gage, not a bad option to go ahead and fill in if, in fact, we see some missed time from Calvin Ridley. Moving on to the tight end position, talking about my top 6 tight end targets for this upcoming week, we begin with Eric Ebron. The fact that he had himself a touchdown, 48 receiving yards, 4 catches on 5 targets this past Sunday against the Baltimore Ravens, that's a great sight to see. On top of that, they play against the Dallas Cowboys this upcoming week. Typically, tight ends play well against them, unless your name is Dallas Goedert. But again, I blame Carson Wentz for that. I think right now, Eric Ebron, a guy that's not very much owned in fantasy right now because of the fact that he hasn't been consistent enough, but easily could be picked up and played. I know, again, the teams that are going on bye this week, a lot of them don't have consistent tight ends. Goddard is probably a guy maybe you're starting, but you probably had another tight end on roster in order to kind of fill in for that spot. Cleveland, maybe you were trying to roster one of those guys. Maybe next week, Austin Hooper comes back, you can pick him up. Gerald Everett's been missing is going to miss time this week. And then, of course, Drew Sample, not another guy. So again, I don't know if you're going to need Eric Ebron, but the tight end position has been such a pit of doom this year that it wouldn't hurt to potentially pick up a player like this. Another player that I wanted to mention, and I want to first and foremost apologize to everybody on Sunday. A lot of you were like, where is Robert Tonyan? He's going to feast against the Minnesota Vikings. I had no clue that Robert Tonyan was going to play as well as he did. He was the number 2 option in comparison to everybody on that field in the passing game. It was Devontae Adams, and then Robert Tonyan had the second best receiving game on the field, and Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson played in that game. So it's pretty crazy that Robert Tonyan, 5 catches, 79 yards, had himself over 10 points. Pretty good game there. They play against San Francisco this week. Again, if they're not going to bring in any other receiving options, and if Allen Lazard is not going to make it to play this upcoming Thursday, then Robert Tonyan, not a bad option going forward again. We have Logan Thomas coming off of the bye week. Again, Logan Thomas, the tight end for the Washington football team. In the last 2 games that he's played, he's had a total of, if I'm not mistaken, 8 targets, 7 receptions, 102 receiving yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns. He's averaging just about 12.5 to almost 13 fantasy points a week in half PPR in the past 2 games. Again, in one of those games, he played against the New York Giants. He gets to play against them once again this upcoming week. Should be a pretty good pickup and play, potentially in my eyes, in a matchup which should be advantageous. And again, Kyle Allen has been playing well over the last couple of weeks for the Washington football team. Trey Burton is my number 4 option. They have 3 starting tight ends, legitimately. The fact that Jack Doyle scored for the second week in a row, or the second game in a row for them, the fact that Trey Burton scored for a second week or second game in a row, shouldn't really come to anybody's surprise. It's just a matter of Am I going to see enough production from Trey Burton in the passing game that when he doesn't score this touchdown, he could be viable? I don't know if that's the case, but if this offense is going to put 41 points on the board, that's a crazy number. I don't think they'll be able to do it against Baltimore this upcoming week, and it makes me a little bit hesitant to suggest to Trey Burton as a potential pickup and play. But again, if he's going to see targets, if this offense wants to continue to utilize the tight end position, then maybe we end up seeing Trey Burton continue to be a relevant tight end. But again, it's just tough with Mo Alley-Cox and Jack Doyle always getting just as many targets or receptions and touchdowns as him. It makes it a tough task at hand for sure. The next player I wanted to talk about is Ross Dwelley. So as of right now, George Kittle is going to be missing a pretty good amount of time. He has a fracture in his foot. So what exactly does that mean? Well, it's either going to be Ross Dwelley or Jordan Reed. Jordan Reed is designated to return from the injured reserve, but I don't think he plays this upcoming week. Again, it's a Thursday game. It's a short week. So Ross could probably be the starting tight end. If that's the case, Nick Mullins did target him a couple times and send the ball in his direction, even scoring a touchdown with him. So that could be an option that I could see them continuing to utilize as a potential pickup and play. Again, for those of you who are George Kittle owners, you got to put him on your IR slot and probably pick up a tight end this week. The last guy I wanted to mention is Gerald Everett. I know they go on bye, but his utilization over the last 4 weeks has been significant enough that I need to mention it, right? In the past 4 weeks, he's had 22 targets, 16 receptions for 117 receiving yards, and 1 receiving touchdown. He's averaging just about 8 fantasy points per game in the last 4 weeks. Those kind of numbers are going to continue to build. Just this past Sunday against Miami, had himself 9 targets for 5 receptions. If those numbers continue to go in his direction, Higbee's pretty much disappeared in this offense. It seems to me that Gerald Everett is not a bad tight end option. We move on. Let's talk about quarterback, shall we? Starting off with my number 1, Joe Burrow. If anybody drops Joe Burrow in your league, you need to go ahead and punish them and pick them up in order to help your team, because Joe Burrow has been playing fantastic. The fact that he beat the Tennessee Titans yesterday is unbelievable in my eyes. Still had himself with 4 starting offensive linemen out, 249 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns, and was a relevant quarterback, period. In my opinion, if he's going to play against teams like that aren't going to be able to take advantage of his offensive line, I know he has to play against Pittsburgh twice in the next, 8 games. That's tough, but there's always a possibility that you could go ahead and, in relation with another quarterback, avoid those matchups and take advantage of the better ones that Joe Burrow has on hand, which should be pretty exciting in my opinion. We move on to the next option, of course, Matthew Stafford. Now, here's the thing. Matthew Stafford in the last 2 games has been playing well against Indianapolis, a defense that is one of the upper echelon defenses in the league right now. 336 passing yards, 3 passing touchdowns, threw an interception, it was a pick 6, but it's all good. He gets the ball back, continues to fire out. Even without getting Galladay for the majority of that game, he was still able to produce. I think this upcoming week against the Minnesota Vikings secondary should be a pretty good back and forth matchup in which I see Matthew Stafford scoring some points. Cam Newton's my number 3. They play against the New York Jets. I know Cam Newton hasn't done anything in the passing game. He is purely just a running back that throws the ball every now and then. What they used to call Lamar Jackson, just a running back. It almost seems like Cam Newton really is just a running back. I know he's throwing the ball, 25 times in a game, but he's not throwing touchdowns. He's running the ball for over 50 yards and a rushing touchdown every time out. So that's where his value is. He's going to get at least 11 to 12 points on the ground, and then the upside will be in the passing game, the 1 to 200 passing yards that'll end up being the potential of 4 to 8 extra points and get him to that 20-point mark. I think against the Jets, very capable of scoring a couple of times, to be honest, because again, that defense, it's nothing great to see. Derek Carr is my number 4. I know Derek Carr didn't play specifically well, but again, the weather was a little tricky in Cleveland. That being said, they play against the Los Angeles Chargers, and the Los Angeles Chargers want to go ahead and let everyone else win games. They're like, you know what? We have a 21-3 lead. Here you go. Let's push it on your side of the table. You take care of the game. We're going to go ahead and just turn off our brains and make terrible decisions on 4th and 1 and run the ball. Anyway, I'm a little salty, as you can see. Derek Carr should be a great play this week. I think Derek Carr, even in a game in which they ran the ball almost 40 times, against the Cleveland Browns in a game in which the weather was definitely affecting them. I think Derek Carr is a far better quarterback than he has been in the past. He's had multiple games this season of over 200 passing yards, 2+ touchdowns. I think he can continue to get back to that this upcoming week against that secondary that just traded Desmond King. It just makes Derek Carr more of a viable option in my eye. Teddy Bridgewater is my number 5. Again, I know Teddy Two Gloves wasn't great, but again, he'll have to be tested this week against the Kansas City Chiefs. Kansas City was getting the ball moved on them by the Jets of all teams. I don't know if they were playing down to the Jets or what exactly the situation was, but regardless, Teddy Bridgewater, you have your opportunity of redemption. You didn't play well against Atlanta. You're still a team that could potentially make the playoffs. You're going to have to turn it into overdrive. You get Christian McCaffrey back. So just dump it to him. Let him do the rest. And then you've got so many other valuable wide receivers. Just let them continue to make plays after the catch and just continue to rack up the yards. I think Teddy Bree could be a potential good option here. The last option I wanted to mention, a guy that is widely owned, probably in majority leagues, unless it's a 2 QB league, Superflex, Kyle Allen. Kyle Allen has been 20-plus points for the last 2 games. Well, in a 6-point per passing touchdown format. In a 4-point per passing touchdown format, I think it's about 16 to 18 points. Not a bad option. Again, we throw him out there. He plays against the New York Giants. Again, he had himself a pretty good week. The last time he played against them, 280 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns, 8 rushing yards. Again, could end up creating something similar. Now, we talk about the last waiver wire targets of the week, defenses, streaming defenses. Now, again, I don't know what's available in your league. I went and I looked at the ownership of some of these defenses, and I think if, in fact, somehow, some way, the Patriots defense is available, of course, you got to pick them up because we're playing anybody against the Jets this upcoming week. So make that happen. I think Kansas City, for those of you who have had Kansas City in the last 2 weeks, we've seen them produce against the Denver Broncos and the New York Jets. I think this upcoming week, I'm willing to hold them and see exactly what they're capable of doing against Carolina because this defense has been playing well in my eyes. Number 3 is the New York Giants. Again, the last time they played against the Washington football team, they played pretty well. They, caused turnovers, got some sacks, QB pressures, and they ended up scoring a defensive touchdown. If they can go ahead and replicate that, then they could be of pretty good value. Again, I have to bring up teams like the New York Giants because, again, there's a lot of good teams on bye. And there's a lot of really bad matchups for some of these defenses that I'm not willing to take advantage of. For example, I have to bring out the Houston Texans, a defense that I haven't wanted to use in fantasy for over 2 years because they haven't been able to stop a soul. But the thing is, they play against an offense like the Jacksonville Jaguars who want to lose games. And on top of that, don't really end up producing much with Minshew at quarterback. Now that you bring a different quarterback in, because Minshew is going to miss and potentially be inactive this week, you don't even know what you're going to see. I mean, it's going to be a guy that has no experience, rookie quarterback. You could potentially take advantage of him. Maybe Romeo Crennel wants to send some blitz packages at him and end up giving him a little bit of trouble. The Washington football team, not a bad defense. Again, I think the Giants versus Washington is probably going to still be a lower scoring event because both these offenses aren't great. And both of them, both these teams have a defensive minded or special teams minded head coach. So again, they could just be a lower scoring event and both these teams get after the quarterback, make plays, and end up, causing a couple turnovers. The last thing I wanted to mention is the Arizona Cardinals. Tua didn't look great. Let's say that at the very least. Tua had less than 100 passing yards. What was he, like 9 for 19 passing? Didn't look great. So if, in fact, the Cardinals really put some pressure on him, in any capacity, just like the way that Aaron Donald and Michael Brockers were really sending it at him, there could be a potential in which the Cardinals could give him a little bit of trouble. This time last week, I talked about the Miami Dolphins as my number 6 defense because, again, I know how Jared Goff plays. I'm telling you, dude, I saw that, and those Dolphins defense, they put up a good amount of points. Anyway, thank you, everybody, for watching. If you like today's episode, make sure you click that like button down below. Tomorrow, we'll be talking about my running back rankings. We'll talk about matchups, rankings, some news around the National Football League going into Week 9. Thank you, everybody, for watching. I think, of course, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are winning tonight. We'll see how that lays out. Thank you, everybody, and until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.